Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Rob Motive JT. You know, I was having a conversation the other night with somebody I know, and we got to talking about cars. Of course, I mean, I love cars and vehicles and stuff. He happens to have a Jeep Gladiator, by the way. So we were talking about him, and we got onto the subject of used vehicles. Because I've bought a couple of used vehicles recently, the Honda Civic over there, and before that, a Mercedes, of all things. And he told me, he said, I would never buy a used vehicle. And he said, I wouldn't want anybody to ever buy my used vehicle. So I got to thinking, well, gee, you know, I've got a couple of used, and I'm curious about such things. So I asked him what he was talking about. And he told me that he never does anything when he buys, or rather gets, a new vehicle. And he leases vehicles. He doesn't buy them. So, you know, I thought, well, I'm going to push this a little more because I'm curious, and maybe there's a video in it. I don't know. And boy, was there a video in it. So I asked him, he says that he never does anything. Because he leases the vehicle, he believes that he shouldn't have to do anything with it. He's renting it. He shouldn't have to upkeep it or do anything like that. So I pushed a little further. I said, well, what about recalls? If you get a recall, do you take it in? Do you have it fixed? And he said, no, I don't do that. Why should I have to do that? It's not my vehicle. They're not paying me to take it in. I mean, he's paying to lease it himself. So he said, no, he never does that. And further, if it's something that happens to throw a code, let's say throw a light on the screen or something, you know, they have those little readers out there, right? And those little readers you can plug in underneath your dash. You can reset the codes. In other words, get them off the screen so you don't have to look at them. That's what he does. He plugs that thing in and he gets rid of the code, particularly before he turns it back into the leasing company. So they're unaware of it, and so would the next person be, unless that light happens to pop on while they're test driving it or while it's sitting on the lot. So I went further. I asked him next. I said, well, what about tire rotations, for example? I mean, you know, you keep these things. He drives it quite a bit. You know, usually puts on about 30, 40,000 miles, something like that. Typically a 3-year lease is what this person does. He said, no, I don't do that. Why would I do that? Again, I'm not buying this thing. It's not my vehicle. Why waste my time going in, screwing around, sitting there and paying if it's out of, you know, the warranty period with miles? And he would run out at the end with, say, 40,000 miles. So he doesn't do that at all. He says, I just lease it to drive it. I don't have it to take care of it. That's why I lease it. I don't want to spend any extra money. If I wanted to do that, I'd buy it. I said, well, okay, that's great. And another thing I noticed, and ribbing the guy as we're going, you know, is your vehicles always look filthy dirty. And I should talk. Mine aren't the cleanest in the world. Although I do wash them, he never washes them. Again, this philosophy that you shouldn't have to do anything. And I said, well, what if, you know, you get bird droppings or tar or whatever on the paint? I mean, that's going to damage the paint. And he says, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's going to happen. But when you turn them back in for lease, they're not looking for that kind of stuff, especially if it's small. You know, generally the rule is if it's less than, I think, a penny, a dime, a quarter, a nickel, whatever it is, they don't ding you for it anyway. Plus, he said, if it ever did come up, he'd just say it was a natural occurrence. There's nothing I could do about it. You should have better paint. Yeah, I'm not sure how well that would go over at the dealer, but that's his philosophy. So then, as I'm thinking more, and again, I'm focusing on my own vehicles because I have a used car over there, bought it with 15,000 some miles on it, and I'm thinking, you know, I really don't know how people treated this either. Who knows? I hope it wasn't a person like this cat. So next up, oil changes. Now, let's get a little bit more technical, a little bit into the bigger systems, the more important systems, right? So, well, what about oil changes? Don't you do oil changes? No. Why would I change the oil? Again, it's an additional expense, and his philosophy is they don't pay me to do oil changes. You know, and in nowhere, he thinks, and I think he could be wrong, but it depends on the verbiage in your contract, does it say that you must do oil changes? You must keep up the maintenance. You know, if you turn them in, they don't know whether you've done oil changes or not. You know, they can change the oil, they can look at it, and they can see that it's dirty. Now, they could send the oil in for analysis. I'm assuming if they sent it to a lab somewhere, the lab would be able to tell them that the oil was in really bad shape. I mean, when you turn them in at 40,000 miles and you've never changed the oil, I certainly think the lab results would come back and indicate that. But let's be honest, dealerships, when they take vehicles back in off of lease, they're not looking to put any money into them either. An example of not putting any money into cars, when I got the Honda over there from CarMax recently, I discovered they didn't change something as simple and as cheap as the air filters. The cabin air filter was filthy, the engine air filter was filthy. Maybe the person that had it before me had this fellow's philosophy, I don't know. But it just goes to show when a dealer brings these vehicles in, they're not really checking a whole lot anyway. Now, hopefully they change the oil in them. I did look at the oil in the Honda, and it was a nice, crisp gold color. So I'm pretty sure they had changed the oil. That or the previous owner had changed it recently before they decided to send it back. And by the way, the Honda Civic that I got, that's the vehicle I'm talking about, used, was not a lease. It was an owned vehicle. So I'm hoping that maybe the previous owner took a little bit better care of it because they actually owned it versus leased it. So oil changes, unbelievable to me. That means you're running on the original oil from the factory, which would have all those little metal shavings and junk in them, and the filter. How effective do you figure the engine oil filter is after it's full of all those little micro pieces of metal that have come off of a brand new engine? Because he leases them new. Lastly, I thought, well, surely he takes care of this. Engine and cab air filters. I mean, they're simple to do, right? All you got to do is pop the glove box down, pull the filter out. Typically, they're all behind the glove box for the cab, and put a new filter in. Costs you about $6 to $10, something like that. That's it. And then the engine air filter, the thing that the engine uses to breathe through, all you got to do is pop the air cleaner top off and stick the new filter in. No, it doesn't do that either. I said, you've got to be kidding me. And then it puts me back to my own experience. The filters in the Honda back there were filthy. They had sand and grit and dirt and bugs and leaves and everything else in them. I don't know, maybe the people that had it just lived in a really dirty area. I know they were from Florida. That would explain the sand. So I just thought it was amazing, and you have to be careful when you're buying a used vehicle. I always was kind of skeptical for people that would ask for maintenance records. I'm like, who cares? Who cares about maintenance records? Well, maybe you should care about maintenance records because they're going to show that at least the person who had the vehicle before you did something. At the minimum, oil changes. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, yeah, bad air filters and stuff, that's not great, but the engine oil, that's pretty darn important. Anyway, you just have to be careful when you're buying used vehicles. In this case, I'd hate to be the person that gets this guy's Gladiator after his lease is over and he trades it in. Leave a comment. Let me know. Do you agree when you lease a vehicle, you really shouldn't do anything? You're just renting it. Why spend your own time and money to take care of somebody else's property? Leave a comment. I'd be curious to know. Also, real quick, I do have 2 additional channels. Mod Driven, all about the Honda Civic, and Rob Motive, all about the Toyota Tacoma. Check them out, and if you're interested, why not subscribe? And while you're at it, smash the subscribe button here too. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.